What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Awesemo.com NFL Strategy Show, Thursday Night Football edition. A real barn burner on our hands today between the Carolina Panthers and the Houston Texans. I'm Dave Lockram, as always, joined by Matt Kajeski, running it back once again. And as strange as it sounds, Matt, we have a lot to get into for this slate, especially given the absolute mess of the receiving core that we have for Houston.
It's an absolute disaster. And we're only in week 3. We knew the Texans were going to be a disaster heading into the year, but at least we thought there was some clarity with players like Tyrod Taylor, Nico Collins. Now injuries have completely derailed everything we expected from this team. You know, they pick up a win over Jacksonville. That's good for them. But in this matchup against Carolina, a team I think that's really shocked the world to start the year, I'm not sure how much of a chance they have, but for DFS, we're going to try to dig into this and figure out who's going to be on the field most for this Houston team.
I got to tell you, though, if Tyrod Taylor was not inactive for this game, if he didn't get hurt, I wouldn't be shocked to see the spread where right now it's at 8. I wouldn't be surprised to see him move that significantly. I mean, the guy was playing well. He looked good. He looked nimble on his feet. He looked really good. And I think you and I have talked about it before, but nobody's crowning, or nobody was at least crowning Tyrod Taylor as a great quarterback. But a lot of people were saying that like he was awful. And the truth is, as a starter, he was never that bad. He was always kind of middle of the road. The drop off from Tyrod Taylor to Davis Mills, at least at first glance, is pretty damn significant.
Yes, I think the main thing that we should talk about is the lack of mobility with Davis Mills. We're playing behind a really bad offensive line, and Tyrod Taylor can evade some of that pressure just being mobile himself. He's also obviously a threat to run at any time, to scramble. Davis Mills is the polar opposite. He is probably a bottom 3 quarterback in terms of mobility in the entire NFL, and that is not an exaggeration. This dude came out of high school as the #1 recruit in his class. He went to Stanford, weirdly enough, and then he suffers not 1, not 2, but 3 significant knee injuries that take him out for the year. In college, he was playing with this like enormous knee brace, and I haven't watched the Texans game this year, so I don't know if he's still playing with that. But this dude is literally like a net negative to net 0 in the run game.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No question about it. So, all right, we're going to do it the way that we usually do it here. We'll hit on each team. We'll build a lineup. And Jordan, I don't know if the bug in the lineup builder is fixed yet, because, well, last time chat became just maddened with the idea that we were over the cap. I mean, listen, I've been doing this long enough. I'm not the smartest guy in the room by any stretch, but I know if a lineup doesn't fit inside of the salary restraints, I can tell you that much. And when Jordan builds it on lineup builder, I'll always build it on DraftKings just to make sure we're good. And today, well, hopefully we can figure that out, but we'll do that. And then Matt and I have a couple of props that we absolutely like for this game. It might be ugly, Matt, but ugly games to me are fun. That's the Ben Rasa approach, bet the under, love the ugly games. I mean, he's the type of guy that goes out there and bets soccer teams at like +10.
I heard that yesterday. It was a bit appalling to me. I like Ben, and I like the crazy football games. I will definitely be betting the Appalachian State game tonight, and I will be taking a look at this game heavily as well. As far as the +10 goals in soccer, like that is just a mind-blowing thing that Ben does to me.
It's amazing. All right, so let's dive straight into this one. What I want to ask you before we get to the specific teams, and by the way, welcome to all you guys. Glad to have you with us. As always, make our mornings a little bit easier when you're hanging out in chat. And of course, when you hit that thumbs up button, because that just puts a smile on everybody's face. That would be phenomenal. Maybe we get to 100 as quick as possible, and subscribe to the channel. We are at 59,100 subs, 900 away from 60,000. Thanks to you guys. If you haven't subbed yet and you enjoy this content, hit that subscribe button. Listen, we'll gladly refund your misery if you end up realizing that you hate all of us. Just click unsubscribe. You'll never have to hear from us again. Matt, just a couple questions I have for you on last week, right? Because I feel like this is kind of important. Football is such a small sample size sport, first off. And there's only so much you can glean from a couple weeks of football. But the Carolina Panthers, who you mentioned, looked good, and they did both weeks. One against the Jets, but more specifically against the Saints, really did a good job of limiting Alvin Kamara. Not just as a rusher where he had 8 carries for 5 yards, but also in the passing game where they kind of did a lot to shut him down. Was that more a product of Carolina's defense, who drafted all defensive players last year, beginning to gel and find some synchronicity here? Or was it the fact that New Orleans was terrible? Or do you think it was a combination of both?
I think it was a little bit of both. Like Jameis Winston played pretty bad again. He was like the Jameis Winston of old. But at the same time, you mentioned it, the entire 2020 draft was all defensive players. And if we know anything about the draft, we know you just need to take shots. And they certainly did that. Brian Burns, fantastic edge rusher for them. That's been great. Their DBs have actually outperformed what I expected from them to start the year, at least. And they have invested a lot there. And then their linebackers are all like these hybrid speed guys. And they've been doing this for a while. You think guys like Shaq Thompson, maybe a little undersized for the position, but they're guys that can run and stick with guys like Kamara, which isn't something we've seen recently. So it's awesome to see their defense perform. I think they've been building the right way.
And when it comes to Houston, we actually saw them perform relatively well amazingly in week 1. And then week 2, before Taylor went down, because Mills started the second half, they were in that game. Like that was a game, Matt. And I mean, I don't want to say I was shocked by it, but I would say I was pretty surprised. And you almost have to think that if Tyrod Taylor didn't get knocked out of that one, it could have been competitive up until there were zeros on the clock, because at halftime it was 14-14, and then everything just fell apart. But let's kick it off with the Panthers. Then we'll start with Christian McCaffrey, and then we'll work our way to Sam Darnold. And as Jordan would say, Sam Darnold to Dan Arnold. That's a strange combination there. Well, then we'll talk about the pass catchers and all of that. But McCaffrey in our Showdown top plays tool has a 58.3% top play probability. So that means when you run the simulations, Christian McCaffrey is coming up as the top overall score 58.3% of the time. Now, a lot of people might say, oh, that makes sense. But Matt, that is an insanely high number, even in a single game slate. It just goes to show you what this guy's upside is. 58.3% today.
And he's the most expensive player, not by a wide enough margin, I think is the conclusion we can come to. So he's a player that I think you should just be eating. When we talk about things like ownership, Christian McCaffrey obviously is going to be the most owned player on tonight's slate. And if you look at the cumulative ownership between captain and utility, it's coming in just shy of 90%. Based on some of these simulations and the tools we have, I think there's at least you can make the case that he's still under owned, that this guy should be like 97, 98, 99% owned across lineups. He's just that likely to succeed.
Yeah. At this point, it's like, barring an injury, it's really tough to believe or to envision a way where Christian McCaffrey struggles. I mean, here's the thing. I got my brother-in-law actually the other day. He's a fantasy football guy. He enjoys it, plays some dynasty leagues, dabbles in DFS, but not really, just like as novice as you can get. And he's like, man, McCaffrey really struggled today, huh? Without looking at his fantasy totals, because, he wasn't particularly efficient. I was like, yes, dude still had 25 fantasy points despite averaging 3 yards per attempt. Like, that's what's so good about him. He had 24 carries for 72 yards, averaged 3 yards per carry, but then 5 receptions, 6 targets, 65 yards, and a touchdown. It was not an efficient game, Matt. Yet Christian McCaffrey still put up absurd numbers. And then the game before that didn't score a touchdown, still had 28 DraftKings points. That's what you get from him every single week. And they're going to lean on Christian McCaffrey day in and day out. He now had 30 looks in week 1 and 30 looks in week 2. Find that production elsewhere.
Right. And a lot of it comes in the pass game. So he has 15 targets.
Yeah.
22% target share in the offense. And that's important because on a platform like DraftKings, those are easy catches. He's not being used downfield like any of the receivers. You don't even look at air yards for running back. These are easy pitch and catch opportunities for him to just rack up yardage and fantasy points. There really isn't enough good things to say about him in this spot. If they get up in this game in positive game script, it benefits him via the run. If they're down or a neutral game script, he's extremely active in the pass game. You can't get away from McCaffrey. The interesting question, I think, because he's been inefficient, do you prefer to play him in the captain spot or the utility spot? The ownership is actually split pretty close here. It's about 36% captain and just over 50 in the utility, which I think is the more interesting discussion with McCaffrey.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen in a lot of games recently where the top dogs don't finish in the captain spot for one reason or another, right? Like the Kansas City Baltimore game. Now, granted, totally different environment there. You have so many quality players, whereas in this game, Houston, it's just all scrubs. And Brandon Cooks is the furthest thing from a scrub. You guys know I'm a Cooks truther. But at the same time, they don't have much. They don't have like these elite Christian McCaffrey level players where you had Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, so on and so forth. So the question is, Matt, if you put him in the captain spot, and just to follow up and kind of hit you with another question, if you put him in the captain spot, you can still make, and I haven't built lineups yet. We'll build one later. You can probably still make decent lineups just because of how much just dirt there is in Houston, but actual viable options. But then if you put him at the utility, that kind of means that you're going to have, I don't want to say free reign, but you're going to be able to do a lot with the rest of this lineup. So the hope is that Christian McCaffrey has another big game and a good game, but not an earth-shattering game where he goes for 100 and 100 with 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. You're not even hoping that he fails. You're just hoping that he doesn't hit the ceiling performance. Yes. And maybe the touchdowns go to somebody else. Like in this hypothetical, maybe it's McCaffrey is a fine game, but it's just DJ Moore that gets 2 touchdowns. And McCaffrey is held out of the box, and that's the difference maker in your lineup. And in that instance, I think you certainly want to play McCaffrey in your flex. But in GPPs today, I think that's how I will be handling a lot of McCaffrey. I'm still going to have a fair amount of him in captain, but I'm going to look to some of those lesser owned options that could outscore him through things like touchdowns or big plays.
All right. I want to get straight into, you know what we'll do when we build a lineup at the end of the show? We'll do one with McCaffrey at captain, and we'll do one with McCaffrey in the utility spot. So we'll revisit this.
Perfect.
All right. And Steven said McCaffrey's a lock. Now we just had to figure out what to do with the rest of these guys. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But I think Matt brought up a good point. It's not just about him being a lock. On a slate like this, you have to figure out, can you play him at the flex? Should you only play him at the captain? So we'll build a lineup later in the show and work that out. Let's get to the pass catchers, though. You've got DJ Moore, who has been the clear alpha in this offense to start the season. I mean, Robbie Anderson still has some big play potential. He ripped off a 57-yard touchdown in week 1, which was his only reception of the day. He now has, less than half of the targets that DJ Moore has. And then you've got someone like Terrace Marshall Jr. playing around, 40, 50% of the snaps as a rookie, running most of them out of the slot. Let's talk about the wide receivers first and then get to the tight ends, because I think, believe it or not, that's actually an interesting conversation.
For sure. At wide receiver, I think they're priced appropriately. More people will probably play Robbie Anderson today because of price. You're probably going to try to jam in Darnold and McCaffrey. And from there, unless you make some serious concessions, I don't know how you also get to DJ Moore, which kind of makes him a contrarian option, which is weird to say considering how good he's been this year. And like you mentioned, 28% of the targets, 33% of the air yards. DJ Moore's been fantastic. And it is a 2-game sample. I don't want to make too much of this. Robbie Anderson worked ahead of DJ Moore for a lot of last year, and there's not that much difference. I mean, same coaching staff. You still have Joe Brady there. Only difference is Sam Darnold. And funny enough, Robbie Anderson has some rapport with Sam Darnold. So I do think DJ Moore has been better. I probably think he's the better player overall, but I think this normalizes a little bit. As far as price adjusted plays, I'm looking more towards Robbie Anderson, just so the way the lineups are shaking out with McCaffrey or Darnold being the expensive guys I prefer.
Darnold really hasn't been that bad, Matt.
He's been good.
He's been good. Is it truthfully though? I said this, I think this might've been back in like June when we were doing just starting off with fantasy football content on our fantasy football channel. Follow and subscribe and like that. Those videos if you haven't done so yet, if you like season long and all that. And of course, Matt and Ben putting out some amazing content over at the Awesemo Odds channel. Check that out. If you're like us and you just love all of this shit, join us whenever you can at all those channels. But I basically put it like this. I don't ever expect Sam Darnold to live up to the expectations that he was anointed with upon entering the league as a top 3 pick. Okay. I don't. However, to assume that he was as bad or that he is as bad as he looked with a garbage offensive line in New York pretty much every year. Like he had the highest pressure rate or top 2 highest pressure rate in every season. And then you had Adam Gase at the helm, and then no real viable pass catchers outside of like a Jamison Crowder or a Robbie Anderson one year, or a Brashad Perriman, who literally got cut by the Lions before the season began. So when you look at this now, Matt, it's not a shock to see that with Matt Rule, and who's the offensive coordinator? Joe Brady. Brady, DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, a rookie, and Terrace Marshall, who can do a lot of things on the field, and Christian McCaffrey. It's not a surprise that Sam Darnold is performing well.
I agree with you 100%. And I think the recipe was kind of laid out for us last year with Teddy Bridgewater, a guy who had never truly lived up to his draft potential. I mean, he's coming off a severe injury, so no one expected a lot. And Bridgewater had the best season of his career. And then with Darnold, you have a guy with the draft capital, former number 3 overall pick. As long as he has a pulse, he's facilitating probably the friendliest offense for a quarterback in the entire NFL, or at least it's up there. So I agree with you. Very impressed with Darnold to start the year. It's kind of hard to disentangle him from what is Joe Brady's system and what is Darnold's actual talent. But as far as this slate, I think he's actually a pretty good pivot off McCaffrey if you're trying to play someone in the captain spot. I prefer him on FanDuel just the way it's scored. But you're talking about a 13% captain for a touchdown plus favorite in a team that has scored the ball really well to start the year. So I do think Darnold is a fine contrarian captain. I'm going to have a lot of him in lineups. And if you look at the cumulative ownership between utility and captain, coming in just north of 50% right now, maybe that ticks up a little bit, but because McCaffrey's there, I don't think you're going to reach like the 80, 90% we typically see with quarterbacks, making him a pretty good leverage play.
When it comes to pairing Darnold with McCaffrey, what are just your kind of basic thoughts on that, given that, yes, McCaffrey catches a lot of passes, but Sam Darnold doesn't get credited for completions in terms of like, a 9-yarder here, an 8-yarder here. It feels like there is less upside or less correlation there than there would be with like a Moore or an Anderson, just because while McCaffrey is a great pass catcher and racks up massive PPR points, the likelihood that he's ripping off those 150-yard receiving games with 2 touchdowns is definitely less than both of these outside receivers.
Absolutely. And on a main slate, that's not something I would want to take on,
right.
Even a short slate, like maybe a Thanksgiving slate or just any short slates we have. But in the single game format, they both are just accounting for so much of the offense that whatever correlation they have or do not have together, I don't think it matters too much. You just try to want to jam them.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. From a regular main slate or even like an afternoon slate compared to a showdown slate, we don't have those luxuries of being like, yeah, well, Christian McCaffrey doesn't catch a ton of long passes. You're absolutely right. DJ Moore and Anderson and Terrace Marshall. And then people are going to ask about Brandon Zylstra, but the guy he's playing virtually no snaps. Like it just so happened that he played, what did he play? Like 9 snaps last game. And
he has 9 routes on the year.
Yes. 9 routes on the season. And I do believe all of those came in week 2, but still, I mean, Matt, that's as low a probability play as ever.
For sure. I don't know how the only reason you'd play him is if you're just like in the millie. And even then, I think it's probably a bad idea because people saw him score. I think his ownership probably is a little more than what it should be, even if it's minuscule.
For sure. Actually, let me see here. He ran 8 routes in week 2. So it's better than 1 in week 1. But I mean, I'm not enthralled by Brandon.
They also killed the Saints. Like in week 1, it was closer. And he didn't play. Then they killed the Saints.
I don't know what to make of it. What do you make of Terrace Marshall Jr.? Is this kind of like this feels that to me, TMJ, that's a funny nickname.
I like Terrace Marshall a lot. I think there's upside here for Moore. He's a guy that's been on the field for just north of 50% of the snaps. The routes run are pretty good for him, but Carolina hasn't played with negative game script yet. we've seen Joe Brady's offense many times. They're basically an 11 personnel team, and they'll even use 4 wide at some points. And I think that's why Dan Arnold's there specifically. So I think there's a ceiling for Terrace Marshall that we haven't seen based on routes, runs, snaps. And of course, targets are correlated with those metrics. So when you have a guy not on the field for full time, and that's because of game script, there is this like untapped upside for more with Marshall. And of course, he played in Joe Brady's offense at LSU. Guys very familiar with the system.
No doubt. Do you know what TMJ is?
Why do I know what that is? Like, I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but like, why do I recognize that?
Well, of course, we all know it's temporomandibular joint dysfunction.
Okay.
No, it's that like the jaw thing that a lot of people get, TMJ. It's that dysfunction with the jaw. I don't know.
It like rings a bell, but that doesn't sound familiar to me. I don't know.
Yeah. Symptoms are pain or tenderness of your jaw, pain in one or more of your temporomandibular joints, and aching pain around your ear, Matt. Come on now. Everyone knows that. That was straight off the top of my head.
Okay.
No,
I believe you. Hey, you're a guy that has like, if I were playing trivia with someone on the Awesemo team, I think I'd pick you.
You should pick Ben, but I would pick me second.
You and Ben are the just like.
Well, actually, Alex is probably. I have a lot of useless knowledge and I have a pretty strong vocabulary, but as far as trivia goes, I bet Ben and Alex would just destroy things.
I think Ben in sports and geography.
Do you guys know that I used to bring Ben on to my Sirius XM show? I don't do it anymore, but it was the Awesemo radio show. I would bring him on, and this was years. This was before it was like Fan Vice show. I had a Fantasy Insider show, but when I would bring him on as a guest, he knows the capital to every country in the world. And every time we would try and stump him, every time it'd be the producer, the associate producer, my co-host, and me. We'd all throw him on, and we think of the most obscure country in the world. One time we got him out of hundreds of attempts. We got him one time. The guy, he's a freak.
I'm shocked you got him.
I know. We got him one time, and it was one that you might think he would know.
Do you remember it?
No, he will. Because you know how he is. He'll probably like whipped himself over that, like belt lashes over the bed, like from Boardwalk Empire, after he got that wrong. All right. I want to talk about Dan Arnold, because I see all these reports, and this is what drives me nuts. This is why we do this show, Matt, to dispel the myths and cut through the bullshit. He is not played as many snaps as Ian Thomas. That much is true. But when you're looking just at routes run, Dan Arnold has run 39 routes to Ian Thomas's 25. And he has been targeted now on the season 7 times, which look, it's not great, but he's been targeted downfield on some of these, while Ian Thomas is not going to get, at least I don't expect him to, those type of opportunities. He's been targeted 4 times. And I don't know. I feel like Dan Arnold might actually have some value on this slate.
I 100% think you're right. When he's out there, he is running routes, which is, I mean, he even did this when he was with Arizona. The guy is essentially a big slot receiver. Like, you're not going to see him play in line. So those targets are meaningful with Dan Arnold. And even in the role he plays, like looking at today's slate and the price you're getting Dan Arnold at, there is a pretty reasonable expectation that he'll end up in some lineups because he's a value play, but he also ends up in this like no man's land with price, where I think people are just going to be trying to jam the expensive Carolina players and then go all the way down to the cheap Houston players to make their lineups work. And you have Dan Arnold kind of in that range around the kickers, players like that, seeing some snaps, not all, but when he's out there, they are impactful. So I do like him.
Okay. I like it. Matt, top options from Carolina and any contrarian captain spots that you like, or captain player, or players that we could put in the captain spot or the MVP spot over on FanDuel.
On FanDuel specifically. So FanDuel pricing a little bit different over there. It's pretty similar. However, like Robbie Anderson, I still think comes in with more ownership because he's a little cheaper than DJ Moore. He kind of fits the build where you're trying to jam McCaffrey and Robbie Anderson, McCaffrey and Sam Darnold. So I actually think DJ Moore is going to be a little more contrarian than he should be. And then that's solely based on price. So he's somebody I would be trying to look at if I'm going to some of these contrarian spots. You're still probably captaining Darnold on FanDuel because of pricing structure. Whereas on DraftKings, the PPR nature of the site, I think you could probably captain DJ Moore a little bit more often. But from there, I think the contrarian plays are going to be the guys we talked about, the Terrace Marshalls who might see an uptick in volume if the game is close. Dan Arnold, who plays a very specific role, but that role is conducive to success in the pass game. So that's where I would go for contrarian plays. And it's kind of surprising to call DJ Moore a contrarian play, but I think he will be.
I agree. Dan Arnold is third in air yards on Carolina with 55, 11% of the team air yard share. Ian Thomas has 10 air yards total with a 2% air yard share. I only bring that up because snaps can be misleading, Matt, especially with especially at the tight end position.
For sure. I think like the main sleeper you'd be talking about is Tommy Tremble. But
Ooh.
This is pure sleeper territory because Tommy Tremble, even like if you go back to him at Notre Dame, he's not actually playing like a tight end role. He is like this H-back sort of like he lines up, that kind of like joker position on offense where he's like slightly behind the line of scrimmage in like an up back position. He does stuff like that. So Tommy Tremble's used a lot as like a blocker. He's a decent receiver, but he doesn't have a huge role right now with the team. They're still primarily using Arnold and Ian Thomas ahead of him. But as far as just like guys that are going to be on the field in that pure punt range, Tremble fits the bill a little bit. I mean, he is in the single digits in routes this year, which isn't good.
All right, so here we go. Kicker and defense. Do we know what's going on with the kicker from Carolina?
It looks like it's going to be Zane, to my knowledge.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. But then I was looking something up, and it's like Carolina Panthers bring on their third kicker in 3 weeks.
He's not on the active roster, so I checked.
Okay.
And Zane played bad in their last game. He missed a field goal.
And I thought he missed an extra point too.
He did.
But he's still the guy, huh?
Apparently, unless they bring up somebody else.
Okay. So let's just assume for now, in a game that could see a lot of field goal kicking, Zane, and then Matt, I'd be remiss not to ask you about Carolina's defense. They're only plus 350 to score a defensive touchdown today. That's not that. I mean, plus 350 sounds like a lot, but not when you're talking about a defensive touchdown. It's not.
Right. And it's different. Like Davis Mills at quarterback is substantially different than Tyrod Taylor. Davis Mills is not mobile. Those situations where Tyrod was maybe scrambling to avoid pressure, Davis Mills is going to be taking sacks or causing turnovers, throwing the ball away. Very different. Going to be a lot more turnover opportunities with Davis Mills behind a completely makeshift offensive line. I think that's a pretty decent bet.
I'm with you. All right. Would you see? I'll ask anyway. I know the answer to this. Would you captain the Panthers in large field tournaments or in like larger field single entry tournaments?
For sure. And it's going to come in with essentially no ownership. People are going to jam the studs. Like you said, it's going to come down to defensive touchdowns, special teams touchdowns, which certainly can occur. And we have seen Carolina take their foot off the gas this year. They haven't played with a deficit yet. So yeah, it is possible, unlikely, but that's why it's a large field play.
I will just say last thing. I think Robbie Anderson at his low captain spot ownership right now is a really fascinating captain play because just as far as just ADOT goes and air yards and the ability to break off big plays, he has that. So even though his target share has been lesser than DJ Moore, that's definitely impacting ownership here, and it's impacting salary. Is it the highest probability play? No, obviously not. But when you have big play potential and you're facing a Houston team that's going to cede a decent amount of points, Robbie Anderson to me is pretty intriguing.
I agree 100%. It's kind of the DJ Moore thesis, except he's cheaper.
Yeah, right. Exactly. All right, Matt, let's talk about Houston. Before we do, though, today's show is sponsored by Jock Market. And if you haven't heard, well, this is why I'm here to tell you. Jock Market has turned fantasy sports into a stock exchange. Sounds cool, right? I'll tell you how that works. You don't have to wait until the end of a game to make money because Jock Market allows you to buy and sell shares of players in real time for real money with guaranteed payouts for all shares at the end of each night. You got NBA, MLB, NHL, NFL, PGA, where you can make real money every hour, every minute, every second of any match. And this is the coolest part. You can use the pregame IPO, right? If you trade or if you invest, you understand how this works, to pick up shares of your favorite player, then buy, sell, or hold them during the game based on your analysis. So if you feel good about someone pregame or during that IPO period, pick them up. And you have an opportunity. You could sell them before the game when their stock is rising, or, hold on to them throughout it, whatever you want to do. There's a lot of strategy involved in this. And if you download the app to get started, use the promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO, you get up to a $50 deposit bonus on your first deposit. It's an exclusive offer only for the Awesemo community. So take advantage of it. Head over to Jock Market, download it in the App Store or the Google Play Store, and start winning some money. All right, Matt, let's go to this mess of a team in the Houston Texans. We'll start it off with Davis Mills. It's a huge downgrade, but he's also one of the cheapest. And I think I can say this with relative certainty. He's one of the cheapest quarterback options you'll be able to roster all season long. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily a good thing, but I'm saying very, very rarely are you going to find a quarterback priced where he is.
Yeah, 100%. The Texans have just made such bad decisions throughout the entire process. And I mean, Davis Mills, throwing him out there, this dude started 11 games at Stanford in his entire college career. If you're talking about quarterback development, he's a guy that certainly needs some. He's not mobile whatsoever. He's playing behind a terrible offensive line with no pass catchers against a strong Carolina defense. At the same time, he's going to have the ball in his hands every play with negative game script. They're not going to push the ball downfield because they can't. So you have the opportunity to maybe rack up somewhere between like 150, 225 yards just based on like cheap little PPR plays. And for that reason, at his price, he does fit in these lineups where you have McCaffrey, you have Sam Darnold. He's not too difficult to fit. So I think in low risk contest, like you mentioned, you probably just eat this. In tournaments, I probably want to get contrarian on the Carolina side with players like Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, rather than go to Davis Mills.
I hear you for sure. I mean, what's the likelihood that we get a ceiling game for Mills, and what is a ceiling game for Mills?
Dude, I like this. Did you see the play last week where the Texans had the ball on 4th and 2? There was a penalty.
Punted.
They could accept the penalty and then have a 3rd and 10. Instead, they declined it and punted. You know what I'm talking?
Wait, but it's even worse though. It's I'm okay with them declining the penalty. It's the punting that's the problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
It would have been 4th and 2 at their opponent's 45.
Dude, so that's one bad decision. And they're carrying so many running backs on the active roster that like when Nico Collins, when these guys got hurt, like they had some tight end injuries, like Chris Conley played tight end for some positions for this team in their last game.
Is
Chris
that real?
Conley.
That's real?
That's real. Like what in the world?
In week 2.
They have so many like RBs and stuff on their roster that when like injuries to the pass catchers occurred, they just did not have the personnel to fill the starting lineup.
Dude, that's so crazy. Legalize says, am I making a mistake not rostering a quarterback in tonight's showdown in a single entry tournament tonight, Matt?
How big is the field? But probably is the answer.
Yeah, I would think so. But one of the reasons for that too is it's not hard to roster a quarterback.
Oh, it's super easy. There's so many punt plays.
Yeah. You have McCaffrey. That's tough. But on Monday, who was Monday? Green Bay and Detroit. On Monday, you had Goff, who was relatively high priced, but then you had Rodgers, Adams, and Jones. And, your punts were limited, and Hawkinson was relatively expensive. Like now, and then on Sunday, we don't need to go through it again, but Baltimore, Kansas City, you get it. Now you just have so many options that are cheap that actually are going to be forced into the game plan. So let's talk about it, Matt. Like you talked about it, Conley, 90% of snaps last week. It's Nico Collins on the IR. Anthony Miller, he's going to be out there or active at least. But you look at the snap counts, and you had this is where it gets crazy. You look at the snap counts, and Brandon Cooks played 92% of snaps. Conley played 90. Collins only played 3%, got hurt. Amendola 20. Andre Roberts 36. Anthony Miller didn't see the field. It's like you had two guys that played almost every snap at wide receiver. And then outside of that, it was just a mess.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a mess as well moving forward. Anthony Miller's return does help. This is a guy that they traded for. He should play a big role for this team. And I think he's going to walk into some opportunity immediately out of necessity. So you talk about the players that saw snaps for this team last week, like Andre Roberts playing 36% of the snaps is nearly a career high. Andre Roberts is on the team for special teams only. He played out of pure necessity. I think Anthony Miller comes in and plays immediately over Andre Roberts, which is interesting for this game. The question is, do they use more 12 personnel, things like that, that really remove a third receiver from the formation entirely? And at this point, that's probably their best bet with like Jordan Akins and Pharaoh Brown. Each of them played over 60% of the snaps last week. And I think that's probably something they're going to continue to do, not only because of injuries to the receivers, but their offensive line is so bad that they need an extra tight end there to help pass protect.
All right. So if you were to break down the snap count, just obviously theorizing here, Matt, what would you have put if you had to put it on paper, like with basketball, we'll do our rotational minutes. I know you don't do a ton of basketball DFS, but you work out rotations and minutes for each guy's.
Yeah, I do college, so I'm familiar.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So NBA, get it to add the 240. Obviously it's a little bit different because there's not a set number of snaps, but in terms of percentages, what do you think we'd see with these guys tonight?
I think it's going to be Cooks and Conley. Those are your two wide receivers in base formations. And then I think you'll see Anthony Miller come in for maybe 50% of the snaps is why I would project him. Not because they're going to play a lot of 12 personnel. Miller hasn't played since week 1 of the preseason, and it was a shoulder injury. I believe that's something he's dealt with in the past, likely dealing with some conditioning issues and hasn't been practicing with the team for very long. So yeah, I don't know how much you want him out there anyway, but at the same time, the Texans literally do not have any replacements. So I would say there's like a range from Miller between like 40 to 65, 70% of the snaps. And I would expect it to be in the middle of that.
I like Brandon Cooks a lot today. I don't love him in the captain spot though.
I think he's a low upside option, and that's reflected in things like their Vegas total, their implied team total, and how much do we expect them to score with the way the Texans are projected to play because of their bad offensive line, their poor quarterback play. Are the targets going to be coming downfield? I think they're probably going to be more of like intermediate bubble screen type targets for Cooks, and he can rack up PPR value on those. But can he outscore McCaffrey, Darnold, DJ Moore? I'm with you, and I'm not sure that's something that I want to do, especially at the price.
Now, there's a prop I like on Cooks that we'll get to momentarily, but I'll tell you this much. Here's why I think Cooks is a very solid flex play, probably not the best play for captain. It's basically everything you just said. Now, Davis Mills and him did hook up on a 2-yard touchdown last game. He did have a 29-yard gain, but man, they did. Eddie Carter says, what's 12 personnel? 2 tight end sets. So Davis Mills targeted him. So Davis Mills came in to start the second half. He attempted 18 passes. 10 of those went to Cooks. 10 of them. That's a 56% target share. That's crazy. And while a lot of those, they did not convert into receptions, I'm looking at this as you put it at Matt, probably a low upside spot, unless Davis Mills with a week of practice can find ways to get Cooks the ball in space, because Cooks is a playmaker. Like Cooks can outrun you on the side, down the sideline. He can make plays, and he is a good receiver. I just don't know if he has that huge ceiling today. But what I do know is your other options are Chris Conley and Andre Roberts and maybe Anthony Miller, unless they come in with this obscure game plan where it's like, all right, let's throw Carolina for a loop here and not target Brandon Cooks at all. We've seen teams do this weird shit before when the defense comes in with the intent to take away the top guy, the only top guy. But if you're Davis Mills, are you not going to try and force the ball like he did last week in the second half to the only legitimate quality receiver on your roster? I feel like you have to.
I feel like you have to as well. If you're the Texans, you just don't have the player personnel to be doing this kind of gamemanship. Like Chris Conley is a career journeyman. Can you play him over Brandon Cooks in this situation?
Right.
I don't think so.
Neither do I. Okay, so are you actually looking now to how much Andre Roberts do you think you have? How much Chris Conley do you think you're going to have today? These guys are very cheap.
I'm going to have them, and it's because of price. In order to jam in McCaffrey, Darnold, Robbie Anderson, you need to play some of them. Conley's the most expensive of the bunch, but I also think he is the most secure role. He's the one I prefer. From there, Andre Roberts fits a little bit better in lineups because he's literally just barely above the stone min. I would rather get to Anthony Miller. I think Anthony Miller has a better chance of playing just on regular pass-in sets, whereas Roberts is a special teamer. But again, it's going to come down to price. If you're playing these guys, unless you make some concessions, it's still hard to play like Conley and Anthony Miller. So Conley's the one I'll prioritize, trying to get to Miller second. Roberts is third.
Yeah, I think that's the way to do it. Like, are you going to end up with some Mills? You're probably absolutely going to end up with some Mills, Cooks, Conley lineups or Mills.
For sure. I'm going to play Mills in cash. I'm going to have a ton of Mills.
I get it. I don't feel comfortable with a Mills, Conley, Roberts lineup without Cooks. That scares me a bit.
That's tough, but I think people are going to play it. It actually projects really well.
Oh God.
And it's not because like they think Conley or Roberts are good. It literally comes down to price.
Yeah. And it comes down to you have to throw the ball somewhere. So we will make a lineup right after this, Matt. Running backs, another just absolute mess spot for the Houston Texans. Like, Mark Ingram has 40 carries in 2 games, and he's averaging 3.2 yards per attempt. I mean, he has just been dreadful on the ground. Terrible. And if you look at Vegas, they kind of agree with what I'm suggesting here. I'm also obviously 8-point dogs. So you're going to see, you're obviously going to see some lower rush totals, but you know, he's at 9.5 rushing attempts. If over's juiced a little bit, he's at like 34.5 rushing yards. I wouldn't be surprised if you see more Phillip Lindsay or David Johnson in the run game because Mark Ingram has just been so ineffective. And we always just assume that it's going to blow out and they're going to have to abandon the run, but that's not always what happens, Matt. So I like to cover both angles here.
I agree with you. And I mean, the carries have been lopsided. The snaps haven't necessarily been. Like Mark Ingram, he's been out there 40%. David Johnson, 35%. And they've interestingly been using him as like more of a pass catcher. But Phillip Lindsay, he's at 24%. Rex Burkhead even has appeared in 15%. And Rex Burkhead hasn't actually carried the ball yet. I think there is a chance that this does normalize a little bit over the course of the season, especially with Ingram being ineffective. I mean, Ingram's on the wrong side of 30. Most of these backs are at this point, or they're at least close to it. David Johnson's nearing 30 as well. But there are 4 players that have some sort of capital invested in them. I do think this will normalize a bit throughout the season.
Yeah. So who do we like here, if anyone?
I'm not going to try to play them, but if it comes down to it, I mean, it's honestly probably going to come down to price. And with the Houston backs, Mark Ingram, a little bit expensive and it's warranted. He has seen the work. But if you're going down to like David Johnson, who's been out there on a lot of pass downs, and again, they're going to split all these roles, but Johnson has been used a little more as a pass catcher. He's probably the one I'll try to get to because of the negative game script. But again, you're not looking at a huge price difference between Ingram and Johnson. If you can find the salary, I think you can probably do a lot with the extra 1,000 you save. But if you can't get to it, David Johnson would be the one based on price.
Okay.
None of them are comfortable plays.
Not at all. But I do think that David Johnson, if this game script does go according to, you know, what most people expect, right? More than touchdown dogs, 8-point dogs in this game. I do think that David Johnson would be the biggest beneficiary here. It's just how efficient are you going to be, and can you turn them into anything would be the question. But he's ran 28 routes on the season to Ingram's 9. I think Lindsay's at 12. Yep. Rex Burkhead's run 19.
Rex Burkhead has no role in the run game though.
No.
And Rex Burkhead only has 2 targets.
I know that's the funny part. And any interest in Joey Sly here?
Mild interest. He would just be, if I get to him in those constructions, not forcing it, not trying to move it out. I would prefer the Panthers kicker but kickers are tough on this slate just with Gonzalez being bad. I think if Gonzalez misses a kick or something and he's the only kicker that's up for Carolina, they might even consider going for 2 rather than kicking some extra field goals, or just like going for it on 4th if it's reasonable rather than kicking a long field goal. With Houston, you're just hoping they score more than expectation.
All right, Matt, want to build a lineup?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. And if you guys were looking to get some access to Awesemo, we talk about the top plays tool. You hear us reference ownership all the time, and the player projections or the lineup builder, the boom bust tool, which is phenomenal. And it's not just for football either. You're talking basketball, baseball, the top pitchers, the top stacks tool, hell, everything, PGA, NASCAR, MMA, esports, all of that. We've got those tools for everything. And some of the best guys out there making it happen, especially Alex Awesemo himself, who's getting married this weekend. Shout the boy out on Twitter. Wish him luck. He's going to need it. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm not. But it's an exciting weekend for Alex, and hit him up. But number 1 ranked DFS player in the world. Dude's won a ton of money, and he built these tools and he uses these tools. So, I think people have confidence in doing that. If you want to get 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum, that's every tool. And now we have the ability to add a week of Fantasy Cruncher, not just a month. Use the promo code NFL Strategy Show, all one word, all caps, NFL Strategy Show, all one word, all caps. Get 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. And if you want to just make an investment, go for a full year, you can do that too, or a month of just NFL, a year of just NFL, or all sports. We've got a subscription. We got a package for literally anybody out there. So go to awesemo.com/join or awesemo.com/promos. Check it out. And if you have questions, my DMs are open. I'm happy to answer them before you sign up over on Twitter. All right, Matt, let's build a lineup here. 1 with McCaffrey and captain, 1 without. What do you want to start with?
Let's hit the McCaffrey one first.
All right, let's go. McCaffrey, captain spot. How many likes? 97 likes. All right. I knew we'd hit 100 quite easily here. Appreciate you guys. Almost 450 watching early on a Thursday morning here. McCaffrey, captain spot. All right, I'll throw in the first one, and then he's 20,000 a captain. All right,
Isn't that crazy?
What?
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. I'm gonna go. I wonder if I want to mix it up for us a little bit. Go with a cheaper option out of the gate, but I'm gonna go Robbie Anderson, Matt.
Love it. Love Robbie Anderson.
Okay, you're up.
It's really hard for me not to say Darnold. Like, it really is.
All right.
Don't you think?
Sam Darnold. All right. So now we're getting now it's getting a little.
Isn't it
messy.
hard to not do Darnold though?
It's very hard. It's very hard. And I think this will be a relatively popular build. Well, those 3, which makes me think that Brandon Cooks. Now maybe he will be very high. I just feel like, if you're playing McCaffrey and then you're playing Darnold and you want to pair wide receivers or pass catchers with him, Brandon Cooks, if McCaffrey's at captain, kind of is a casualty of this slate, but we'll see.
I think you could play. So you could do like Cooks or Mills, but not both. Right?
Not if you have
then
these
you are
3
really punting if you do that.
If you have these 3 guys all already in there, you can't play Cooks.
You'd have to play like Tommy Tremble. You're right.
How much is he?
200, but you don't want to play him unless it's the middle.
Actually, yes, you could play Cooks, Andre Roberts, and Tremble, and you'd have $100 left over.
Man, I do not feel good about that lineup, but hope Tommy Tremble takes a step forward if you play that.
I mean, that is kind of tempting. Right. It actually, I'm shocked that works.
Let me ask you the question. What are the chances you think Cooks outscores Mills?
In a full point PPR format, I don't have a number for you, but
I think there's a decent chance.
I think so too. You could see Cooks go, 8 for 70, which would probably outscore Mills pretty easily, unless Mills is ripping touchdowns left and right, but I don't see that being the case.
Me either. So is this a situation where maybe like just getting Cooks in your lineup over Davis Mills is worth eating like a one catch game from a Tommy Tremble, because we have seen that in the past where the studs just score so much that the path to getting the optimal lineup is eating somebody like that.
Eating someone like who? Tremble?
Yeah, even if he doesn't perform well.
So what, you want to do Cooks, Roberts, Tremble on this one?
No, I don't. I'm just making the case for it.
Okay. I'll go. I mean, it's crazy, but it's not that crazy. Zylstra ran 8 routes last week and would have been in the optimal for sure if this was a Thursday night game.
Man. Yeah, he would have been.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. He would have been minimum salary. He would have been $200.
So this is so gross. All right. How about this? Chuba Hubbard played 19 snaps in a blowout last week.
God.
We didn't talk about him. He didn't really carry the ball much. But if it's another blowout, does he get a handful of touches and open some salary?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. But you got to make concessions if you're playing these three.
You know what you could do? You could go Terrace Marshall, Andre Roberts, Panthers defense, which isn't the craziest idea.
No, that's better than the two we made just now.
That's not bad, right? That's a full out onslaught, which could actually work.
Yeah, 7.5 point favorites. I like that one.
Okay, now we're running short on time. So let's go no Christian McCaffrey captain, but Christian McCaffrey in the flex spot. So first player is McCaffrey into the flex. Matt, you make the call. Who do we captain?
Let's hit Robbie Anderson captain for contrarian.
I love it. Look, you're looking for the ceiling game here. You know what I mean? And you need that if you're not captaining Christian McCaffrey. That's the thing.
So now with Robbie Anderson and the captain, we probably want Darnold, right?
I was just going to say, we're definitely putting Darnold in here. We have about 4,600 remaining per 3 players. We're going to need a punt anyway. So do you want to go to Conley, Roberts? What do you want down here?
Let's hit Conley. He's secure.
Yeah, I think so too. All right. So we're in good shape. We have Robbie. Let's see what happens if we do throw Cooks into this lineup.
I think you could play after Cooks. You could play Ian Thomas. He's right there. I don't really love it. You could play Anthony Miller, assuming he might play more. There's options if you do play this lineup.
For sure. And
I would probably hit Miller.
Okay. So go Miller there.
Just as a filler.
Or just throwing this out there. If you went Davis Mills, there's not much. No, never mind. I thought that would open it up and get you a little bit more, but it doesn't. So, I mean, I think what it's coming down to is probably a lot of Carolina onslaughts and then some lineups where you've got Mills and then 2 cheap Houston receivers, which feels gross. But like if you play Mills and Cooks, the problem is you're sacrificing a lot on the side of the team that is expected to score a lot more points and just has way better players. That's my concern.
Yeah, that's a legit concern too.
No question. All right. That's a good thought exercise there. A little thought experiment, Matt. Jordan, thanks for Jordan. Did the salary work out right? So I don't get excoriated. Matt, before we go, top props. And if you guys wanted to check out some free tools on the site, MLB Top Stacks is free today and NFL Showdown ownership. So when we do the deeper dive live before lock, you can follow along with us in ownership and use that to your advantage. All of that free at awesemo.com. Matt, give me your top prop of the day for tonight's Thursday Night Football Showdown.
This might be a little crazy, but I want to look at some Anthony Miller because he's not going to be priced correctly if he's playing a full-time role. His props are really low. You can get the receiving yards at 25.5, but I really like the over on the receptions 2.5 at plus money, plus 110. And with that, he's going to play in the slot a lot, really low ADOT targets, should be little easy pitch and catch opportunities. And we know they're going to have to throw.
Who was it? I'm sorry, I was reading chat.
Anthony Miller.
Okay. I like it. I'm oddly enough going over on 2 Houston receivers. And I don't think it's that crazy, right? Because I'm not going over on yards. I'm going over on receptions. And here's why. Cooks and Conley. You mentioned Conley played 90% of snaps last week. Cooks played 92. Guy might play 100 this week. I wouldn't be shocked. With that in mind, I don't think Brandon Cooks has a huge game yardage-wise. But I think they're going to try to find ways to get him the football. As 8-point dogs, you're also going to be forced to throw unless it's some craziness like Detroit, where we still hit that over on the Jared Goff targets prop or attempts prop, but it was sketchy. Over 5.5 for Cooks and over 2.5 for Conley. It's at even money, Matt. If he's out there for as much as we think, I don't think Conley's going to be particularly good today, but I think he'll at least get enough opportunity, excuse me, playing from behind that he could get to 3 for like 15 and I'll be happy. So
I like that one too.
Yeah, that's all I got. Anyway, follow Matt at Matt_Gajeski on Twitter. Keep up with everything we got going on. Follow me at Lafayette_D. And as always, shout out your boy Jordan Klein for producing this show very early, still not even 6 o'clock on the West Coast. We'll catch you back here next time. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll see you back here soon. Peace.